Sometimes destiny does not arrive with a crown. Sometimes it arrives as a fading heartbeat beneath the snow. The wind howled through Blackwood Forest with a voice older than memory, carrying frozen pine needles across the narrow trails and weaving white curtains between towering evergreens. Every hunter knew the woods belonged to winter after sundown, yet one rider continued deeper into the storm without slowing. King Cale Ashford sat tall upon his black stallion, his heavy cloak snapping behind him while icy air filled his lungs. The Royal Scouts had begged him to wait until dawn, warning that no prey was worth crossing Blackwood during the season's first blizzard, but Cale had not come searching for prey. For 3 nights an unnatural silence had settled over the northern border. Wolves refused to howl. Birds abandoned their nests. Even the oldest trackers admitted the forest felt as though it were holding its breath. Cale trusted instincts more than rumors, and every instinct inside him insisted that something had changed beneath the snow-covered branches. His horse suddenly stopped. The powerful animal lowered its head, ears twitching nervously toward the darkness ahead. Cale rested one gloved hand against its neck, quietly reassuring the stallion before listening for himself. At first there was only the endless whisper of falling snow. Then, almost hidden beneath the storm, came the faintest sound imaginable. Not a cry, not quite a breath. More like someone refusing to surrender to the cold. Cale's silver eyes narrowed. His senses reached farther than any ordinary wolf's, separating wind from silence until one fragile heartbeat revealed itself somewhere beyond the frozen pines. It was impossibly weak, too weak to survive another hour. Without hesitation, he stepped from the saddle and followed the sound, leaving deep footprints behind as snow climbed nearly to his knees. Thick branches clawed gently at his cloak, while icy flakes settled across his dark hair. Every few yards the heartbeat faded until he wondered whether exhaustion had tricked his senses, yet each time he prepared to turn back it returned again, softer than before, stubbornly refusing to disappear. Finally, he entered a small clearing where moonlight slipped through the clouds just long enough to illuminate a fallen oak. Beneath its wide roots lay the outline of a young woman curled against the frozen earth as though sleep had quietly claimed her. Her dress, once blue, had become nearly the same color as the surrounding snow. Long chestnut hair spilled across the white ground in delicate strands dusted with ice. One small hand rested near her face while the other clutched a simple silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Cale stood completely still. He had seen abandoned travelers before. He had rescued merchants caught in storms. Yet something about this stranger reached beneath the armor surrounding his heart. She looked impossibly peaceful despite the cold stealing warmth from every breath. He slowly knelt beside her and brushed snow away from her shoulder. The movement was careful enough not to startle someone who could barely remain alive. Her skin felt colder than winter itself. Her breathing came so faintly that only his heightened senses could detect it. Whoever she was, she had not been in the forest by accident. There were no tracks leading away from the clearing. The storm had erased nearly everything except one undeniable truth. She had been alone for a very long time. Cale gently lifted the pendant from her fingers. Strange symbols covered the back, worn smooth with age until they were almost impossible to read. Before he could study them further, something unexpected happened. His wolf stirred with unusual urgency. Not aggression, not suspicion, recognition. The sensation struck so suddenly that Cale released a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Impossible, he thought. He had spent years ignoring every noble family's attempts to arrange a royal bond. Countless ceremonies had passed without the moon goddess revealing anyone worthy of becoming his destined companion. Yet standing beside an unconscious stranger in the middle of a snowstorm, his instincts refused to retreat. Save her, the silent voice inside him insisted. Save her first. Ask questions later. Cale rarely questioned his wolf, but this command carried a weight unlike anything he had ever experienced. He slipped one arm beneath the young woman's shoulders and another beneath her knees, lifting her carefully into his embrace. She weighed almost nothing. Her head rested lightly against his chest while a few loose strands of hair caught on the silver clasp of his cloak. For the first time in many years, Cale noticed how quiet the world became when he focused on protecting someone instead of ruling them. He pulled his cloak around her, shielding her from the relentless wind before beginning the long walk back, toward his waiting horse. Halfway across the clearing, a soft warmth pulsed beneath the sleeve covering his wrist. Cale stopped. Slowly he pulled back the leather cuff protecting his forearm. There, glowing beneath the pale winter sky, an ancient mark shaped like intertwined branches shimmered with silver light. The royal mark had remained dormant since the day he inherited the throne. Tonight, without warning, it had awakened. Cale looked down at the unconscious woman resting safely against him. Her breathing was still fragile, but each heartbeat sounded slightly stronger than before. Snow continued falling around them, hiding the clearing from the world as though the forest itself wished to keep it secret for one more night. Cale tightened his hold and whispered words no one else was meant to hear. "Whoever you are coming home." Behind them, the wind erased their footprints almost immediately, leaving no sign that a dying Omega had ever been there at all. While somewhere deep within Blackwood Forest, unseen eyes quietly watched the Alpha King disappear into the storm with the girl Destiny had placed in his arms. The gates of Ashen Keep opened just before midnight, their ancient hinges echoing across the frost-covered courtyard as King Cale Ashford carried the unconscious Omega through the falling snow. The castle servants froze in disbelief. None of them had ever seen their king return from a hunt carrying someone in his arms. Royal healers hurried down the stone staircase with blankets, lanterns, and steaming bowls of herbal water, but the oldest among them slowed after only one glance at the young woman. Dr. Miriam Whitlock gently pressed 2 fingers against the side of Elena's neck before lowering her eyes with quiet concern. "Her heartbeat is barely holding on," she whispered. "The cold has taken almost everything she has left." Cale did not answer immediately. He simply continued walking until they reached the warmest chamber inside the eastern tower, where sunlight greeted the windows every morning. The fireplace already burned brightly, filling the room with gentle warmth and the scent of cedar wood. Carefully, he laid Elena upon the bed while one of the healers wrapped dry blankets around her trembling shoulders. Another prepared herbs that had saved countless travelers from winter illness, but after nearly an hour the room grew painfully silent. Nothing seemed to change. Her breathing remained faint. Her eyelids never moved. Even the fire could not chase away the unnatural chill lingering around her. Finally, Dr. Whitlock stepped back with quiet regret. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "we have done everything we know. Now only time can decide." Cale looked toward the window where snow continued drifting across the castle walls. For reasons he could not explain, accepting those words felt impossible. He dismissed everyone except the doctor. Once the heavy door closed, he removed the leather glove from his right hand and studied the glowing mark still resting beneath his wrist. The ancient silver light had not disappeared since the forest. It pulsed with calm determination, almost as though it recognized the fragile soul resting only a few feet away. Dr. Whitlock noticed the light immediately. Her expression changed from concern to quiet surprise. "The royal mark has awakened," she murmured. "I have not seen that happen in decades." Cale slowly nodded. "Neither have I." The elderly healer hesitated before speaking again. "There is one thing that might help her survive until morning, but it has never been attempted outside the oldest legends." Cale met her eyes. "Tell me." "The life bond." She lowered her voice. "A true alpha may willingly share part of his own strength with another. It cannot heal wounds or erase suffering, but it can remind a fading heart how to keep beating. The risk is that the one who gives cannot choose how much is taken." The room fell silent once more. Cale glanced toward Elena. Her face remained peaceful despite the struggle hidden beneath every shallow breath. She looked like someone trapped between 2 worlds, quietly waiting for one of them to claim her. Without another question, Cale sat beside the bed and gently reached for her cold hand. The moment their skin touched, the silver mark upon his wrist glowed brighter than before. Warmth flowed through his arm like the first sunrise after a long winter. Elena's fingers twitched ever so slightly. Dr. Whitlock watched without speaking. She knew better than to interrupt something older than any written history. Minutes passed, then hours. Outside, darkness slowly surrendered to dawn while Cale remained beside the bed without moving. Servants quietly replaced burned candles. Fresh logs crackled inside the fireplace. Snow melted from the castle roof as morning light painted soft gold across the stone floor. By the second day, Cale had barely slept. By the third, whispers spread through the castle that their king had canceled council meetings and hunting expeditions alike. By the fifth, every servant understood that no one was to disturb the eastern tower unless summoned. On the seventh morning, sunlight reached Elena's face just as a gentle breeze drifted through the open window carrying the scent of pine from Blackwood Forest. Her breathing became steadier. Her fingers slowly tightened around Cale's hand. He felt the movement instantly and leaned forward, scarcely daring to breathe himself. Her eyelashes fluttered once. Then again. At last, crystal blue eyes opened with quiet confusion, reflecting the morning light as though they had captured a piece of the winter sky itself. She stared at the unfamiliar ceiling before turning toward the man who had remained beside her every single day. Their eyes met for the first time, and although she spoke no louder than a whisper, her first words settled deeply into the silent room. "Where am I?" Elena tried to sit up too quickly, but the room swayed around her, and she caught herself against the soft blankets with a quiet breath. Confusion filled her clear blue eyes as she looked from the stone walls to the tall windows where fresh snow sparkled beneath the morning sun. Nothing felt familiar. Not the room, not the warm fire, not even the sound of her own heartbeat. Cale remained seated beside the bed, careful not to move too suddenly. He had faced rival kings without hesitation, yet speaking to the frightened young woman before him somehow required greater care than any negotiation he had ever known. "You are safe," he said gently. "You were found in Blackwood Forest during the storm." Elena frowned as though searching for a memory hidden just beyond reach. "Blackwood," she repeated softly. The name stirred something inside her, but only for an instant. A flash of towering trees. A cold wind. Someone calling out in the distance. Then everything vanished again like footprints beneath falling snow. She closed her eyes, pressing trembling fingers against her temple. "I cannot remember." Dr. Miriam stepped closer with a reassuring smile. "Do not force it. Sometimes the mind protects itself until the heart is ready." Elena nodded slowly, grateful for the kindness in the older woman's voice. When she looked back toward Cale, uncertainty softened her expression. Did you save me?" He answered with quiet honesty. "I found you before the storm became stronger." She lowered her gaze to the blanket covering her hands. "Then I owe you my life." Cale shook his head. "You owe me nothing." Those simple words surprised everyone in the room, including Cale himself. Throughout the kingdom he was respected for fairness and strength, but warmth rarely appeared in his voice. Yet somehow this stranger awakened a gentleness he had almost forgotten existed. During the following days Elena slowly regained her strength. She could walk short distances through the eastern tower with the help of one of the castle attendants, pausing often to admire the winter landscape beyond the windows. The castle overlooked endless forests and frozen rivers stretching toward distant mountains painted silver beneath the afternoon light. Every view felt strangely beautiful, yet none of it awakened recognition. She remembered how to read, how to speak, and even how to play a quiet melody upon the old piano resting in the library. But she could not remember her family, her home, or even her own last clear memory before opening her eyes inside Ashen Keep. The uncertainty weighed heavily upon her heart. One afternoon she stood alone beside the castle garden where delicate white roses somehow continued blooming despite the cold. Cale happened to pass through the courtyard after finishing a council meeting. He noticed the sadness lingering behind her eyes before she even spoke. "Everyone keeps asking where I came from," Elena whispered while watching snowflakes settle across the flowers. "I wish I knew the answer." Cale stepped beside her, his hands resting calmly behind his back. "You do not have to discover everything today." She looked at him with quiet surprise. "What if I never remember?" He considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Then we begin with who you choose to become instead of who you were." Elena smiled for the first time since waking inside the castle. It was small, uncertain, but genuine enough to brighten the winter afternoon. At that exact moment, a sudden breeze swept through the garden, carrying the scent of pine from the distant forest. Without warning, Elena stumbled as another fragment of memory flashed before her eyes. Firelight danced between dark trees. Someone reached toward her. A silver crescent pendant glowed beneath the moon. She instinctively reached for balance, and her fingertips brushed against Cale's bare hand. The instant their skin touched, an invisible wave of warmth spread through both of them. The royal mark beneath Kale's wrist blazed with brilliant silver light beneath his sleeve, while Elena gasped softly as an unfamiliar peace settled over her racing heart. Neither of them spoke. Neither understood what had just happened. But somewhere deep within the ancient magic of the moon goddess, a bond that had waited for years had quietly begun to awaken. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, yet Ashen Keep no longer felt the same. Servants smiled more often when Elena passed through the halls, and even the oldest guards noticed that the eastern tower, once silent and reserved, now carried the gentle sound of conversation and laughter. Elena spent each morning rebuilding her strength with slow walks through the castle gardens, while every evening she found herself drawn toward the library where shelves filled with ancient histories seemed strangely comforting. She read stories of forgotten kingdoms, wandering healers, and old moon goddess legends, hoping that somewhere among those pages a single memory might awaken. Instead, she discovered only an unexplainable feeling that she had once belonged to a world much larger than herself. Kale quietly watched her progress from a respectful distance. Although royal duties demanded most of his attention, he often found reasons to pass through the eastern gardens or the library during the same hours Elena happened to be there. Neither of them spoke about the mysterious warmth they had shared when their hands touched, yet both remembered it. Some evenings they simply stood together on the castle balcony overlooking the endless forest while snow drifted softly across the valley below. Words became unnecessary. The silence between them no longer felt empty. One crisp morning, after Dr. Miriam declared Elena strong enough to leave the castle grounds for a short ride, Kale suggested visiting the forest's outer trails before winter deepened further. Elena hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. The towering pines welcomed them with peaceful stillness, sunlight filtering through white branches and turning the untouched snow into sparkling crystal. Although the landscape appeared beautiful, every step deeper into the woods stirred unfamiliar emotions inside Elena. She could not explain why certain trees felt recognizable or why distant birdsongs filled her heart with quiet longing. She paused beside a narrow stream, where clear water continued flowing beneath thin sheets of ice. Closing her eyes, she listened. For a brief instant, another sound blended with the running water. Soft laughter. A woman's gentle voice calling her name. She turned quickly, but only empty forest surrounded them. Kale noticed the sudden change in her expression. "Did you remember something?" he asked carefully. Elena pressed one hand against her chest. "Not exactly. It feels like the forest remembers me even if I cannot remember it." Before Kale could answer, a faint whimper drifted through the trees. Both turned toward the sound. A small white wolf pup stood several yards away with one front paw lifted uncertainly above the snow. The frightened little creature watched them carefully but made no attempt to run. Elena instinctively knelt, lowering herself until she appeared smaller and less threatening. "It is all right," she whispered with a kindness that seemed completely natural. "You do not have to be afraid." The pup studied her for another long moment before slowly limping closer. Kale remained perfectly still, surprised that such a cautious wild animal approached without hesitation. Elena gently examined the tiny paw and discovered a sharp thorn lodged between the soft pads. With remarkable patience, she removed it and stroked the pup's fur until it relaxed completely. The little wolf licked her hand before stepping back. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of disappearing into the trees, the pup lowered its head respectfully toward Elena, almost like a formal greeting, before quietly running into the forest. Kale had seen wolves acknowledge only those they instinctively trusted. He had never witnessed one offer such quiet respect to a complete stranger. As Elena stood, an elderly voice echoed from behind the nearby pines. "Interesting," the stranger said calmly. They turned to find an old traveler wrapped in weathered gray robes, carrying a carved wooden staff polished smooth by many years of walking. His silver beard reached nearly to his chest, but it was his bright golden eyes that immediately captured Kale's attention. The old man looked first at Elena, then toward the place where the wolf pup had disappeared. "The forest recognizes hearts before names," he said with a thoughtful smile. Elena tilted her head curiously. "Do you know me?" The old traveler slowly shook his head. "Not yet, but I know this much. Ordinary wolves do not bow to ordinary souls." His gaze settled briefly upon the crescent pendant resting around Elena's neck before he quietly added, "Some forgotten stories are preparing to awaken once again." The old traveler disappeared as quietly as he had arrived, leaving only a single set of footprints that the falling snow erased within minutes. Elena remained standing beneath the towering pines, unable to shake the feeling that his words had awakened something sleeping deep inside her heart. On the journey back to Ashen Keep, she spoke very little. The forest no longer felt like an unfamiliar wilderness. It felt like a place that had once known her name. Kale noticed every thoughtful glance she cast toward the distant trees, but he chose not to press her with questions. He had learned that forcing answers only pushed fading memories farther away. That evening, after Elena retired to her room, Kale summoned Dr. Miriam and Captain Rowan to the royal study. The crescent pendant rested upon the polished oak desk between them. Candlelight reflected across its worn silver surface while ancient maps and forgotten family records lay scattered nearby. "Search every archive we have," Kale instructed quietly. "I want to know whether this symbol belongs to any surviving bloodline." Captain Rowan nodded before leaving immediately, but Dr. Miriam remained beside the fireplace with an unusually thoughtful expression. "There is one collection we have not opened in many years," she finally admitted. "The moon archives beneath the old chapel." Kale looked toward her. Why were they sealed? Because some histories frightened people more than they inspired them. Before sunrise the following morning, Kale and Dr. Miriam descended into the hidden chamber beneath the castle. Thick layers of dust covered rows of forgotten books bound in faded leather. Hours passed before the elderly healer carefully opened a fragile volume whose pages had nearly turned the color of ivory. Delicate illustrations filled the margins. Wolves standing beside human guardians beneath a silver moon. Ancient kings kneeling before women wearing crescent pendants identical to Elena's. Miriam slowly traced one illustration with trembling fingers. "I remember this story now," she whispered. "The Moon Guardians." Kale leaned closer. The faded writing explained that long before the northern kingdoms united, a peaceful family known as the Moon Guardians protected sacred places where harmony between wolves and humans was preserved. They possessed no desire for crowns or power, yet they carried an extraordinary gift. Their presence could calm frightened wolves, strengthen weakened bonds, and restore hope where fear had taken root. They served beside generations of Alpha Kings, not as servants, but as trusted companions chosen by destiny itself. Then, almost without warning, every record stopped. One final page mentioned that the family disappeared after a mysterious betrayal generations earlier. Their names faded into legend until most believed they had never existed at all. Kale closed the book slowly. His thoughts immediately returned to the wolf pup that had bowed before Elena, the awakened royal mark upon his wrist, and the strange peace that surrounded her wherever she walked. None of it felt accidental anymore. Meanwhile, Elena wandered through the castle gardens carrying the same unanswered questions. She paused beside a frozen fountain where small birds gathered despite the cold. One curious robin landed upon the stone edge only a few feet away before hopping fearlessly into her open palm. She smiled with quiet wonder. "You are not afraid either," she whispered. The little bird remained for several moments before flying away into the bright winter sky. High above the courtyard, an unseen figure observed everything from a narrow tower window. Hidden behind heavy curtains, Lord Cedric Hawthorne folded his hands calmly behind his back. As one of the king's senior advisors, he had served the royal court for decades. His expression never changed, yet his eyes followed Elena with unsettling attention. A young messenger entered the room, carrying fresh reports from the northern villages. Cedric accepted the parchment, scanned its contents, and paused when he noticed a brief mention of an unidentified woman rescued from Blackwood Forest during the recent blizzard. His fingers tightened ever so slightly around the paper before he walked toward the fireplace and watched the flames consume it. So, he murmured to himself with careful calm. Someone survived after all. Far below, Elena instinctively reached for the crescent pendant resting against her heart. Another memory flickered before her eyes. A warm voice whispered, "Protect the light, no matter where it leads you." The vision vanished almost immediately, but this time one detail remained. She clearly remembered a pair of gentle green eyes smiling at her just before everything had gone dark. She could not remember the face, the name, or the place. Yet for the first time since waking inside Ashen Keep, she realized her memories were not gone forever. They were waiting for the right moment to return, and somewhere within the castle walls, someone else already feared what she might remember. Winter slowly loosened its grip on Ashen Keep, and the frozen gardens began revealing patches of green beneath the melting snow. Every morning Elena found herself waking a little earlier, drawn outside before sunrise by a quiet feeling she could not explain. The castle grounds greeted her with birdsong returning after weeks of silence, and each new day seemed to bring another tiny fragment of the life she had lost. She still could not remember her family or the journey that had led her into Blackwood Forest, but the fear that had once shadowed every thought was slowly giving way to hope. Cale noticed the change as well. During council meetings, his attention often drifted toward the eastern windows overlooking the gardens, wondering whether Elena had discovered another forgotten memory or another reason to smile. His advisors quietly exchanged puzzled glances. Their king had always carried the weight of duty with unwavering discipline, yet now his expression softened whenever her name appeared in conversation. Even Cale recognized the change within himself, although he refused to give it a name. One afternoon, Elena wandered into the royal greenhouse, where flowers from distant kingdoms bloomed beneath warm glass despite the lingering cold outside. She paused before a single white lily whose delicate petals seemed strangely familiar. The moment she reached toward it, another memory flashed across her mind. A gentle woman with kind green eyes placed the same flower into her small hands while saying, "The strongest hearts are the ones that choose kindness even when the world chooses fear." Elena gasped softly as the vision disappeared. This memory lasted longer than the others. She could almost hear the woman's voice echoing through the years. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that someone had loved her deeply once. She remained there quietly until footsteps approached behind her. Cale had entered the greenhouse after finishing another long morning of royal duties. He immediately noticed the emotion in her face. "Another memory?" he asked. Elena nodded slowly. "Only a few words. I still do not know who she was, but I know she loved me." Cale stepped beside her without speaking. Together they looked at the white lilies glowing beneath soft sunlight. After several moments, Elena whispered, "Do you ever wonder if people can lose everything and still become themselves again?" Cale smiled faintly. "I used to believe that strength came from never breaking. I think I was wrong." She looked at him curiously. He continued, "Real strength comes from choosing to keep moving after life changes you." Elena lowered her eyes thoughtfully. "You speak as though you know that feeling." Cale looked beyond the greenhouse windows toward the distant mountains. Every king carries ghosts that no one else can see. She did not ask what he meant. Somehow she understood that everyone carried hidden chapters they were not yet ready to share. Instead, she simply stood beside him in comfortable silence. The quiet between them had become its own language. As they walked back toward the castle, their hands brushed for only an instant. Once again, the familiar warmth flowed between them, calmer now, no longer startling, but deeply reassuring. Neither pulled away. Neither seemed to notice that their footsteps had naturally fallen into the same rhythm. High above them, Lord Cedric Hawthorne watched from another balcony, his calm expression hiding growing concern. Reports continued arriving from distant villages describing unusual changes among the wolves. Restless packs had become unexpectedly peaceful. Long-standing rivalries ended without explanation. Hunters claimed wild animals willingly approached lonely travelers rather than fleeing into the woods. Cedric knew those stories were not coincidences. Ancient legends had always claimed that the return of a true moon guardian would quietly restore harmony wherever they walked. He had spent years believing those legends had died forever. Now he feared they had been wrong. That evening, Cale returned alone to the hidden moon archives. He carefully reopened the ancient book and studied one final passage he had overlooked before. The faded words read, "When the guardian forgets who she is, love freely given shall become the light that leads her home. Destiny may awaken the bond, but only compassion can keep it alive." Cale slowly closed the book. For the first time, he admitted the truth to himself. His heart had begun choosing Elena long before he discovered the ancient prophecy, long before the glowing mark upon his wrist. long before anyone whispered about forgotten bloodlines or sacred destiny. He had chosen her on the night he found a frightened young woman beneath the snow and refused to leave her behind. Whatever the future revealed, that choice had never belonged to fate alone. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed clean by spring rain, yet an uneasy stillness settled over Ashen Keep. Even the birds that usually greeted sunrise remained unusually quiet, as though the forest itself sensed that something long forgotten had finally begun to awaken. Elena stood beside the eastern balcony, her fingers resting lightly against the cool stone railing while she watched mist drift above Blackwood Forest. Ever since the night her pendant and Kale's royal mark had answered each other with silver light, the dreams had become clearer. They no longer arrived as scattered fragments. They unfolded like unfinished chapters waiting patiently to be read. She saw children laughing beneath ancient trees. She saw graceful wolves resting peacefully beside people dressed in silver robes. She heard songs carried through moonlit valleys where fear had never existed. Then, just before waking, she always heard the same voice. When the light returns, remember who you chose to become. The words lingered with her long after the dream faded. Later that morning, Dr. Miriam requested that Elena join her in the hidden moon archives beneath the old chapel. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight as the elderly healer carefully placed an ancient painted scroll across a wide wooden table. The faded illustration showed a young woman wearing a crescent pendant while standing beside an alpha king whose wrist carried the same royal mark Kale now bore. Between them glowed a circle of silver light that spread peacefully across wolves, forests, and villages alike. This was never about ruling, Miriam said softly. The Moon Guardians did not exist to command kingdoms. They existed to remind them compassion is stronger than fear. Elena quietly traced the painted pendant with her fingertips. The moment her hand touched the image, another memory blossomed inside her mind. She remembered standing beside her mother at a peaceful gathering where wolves of every rank shared food, music, and laughter without pride or prejudice. Her mother had smiled gently before placing the pendant around Elena's neck. "This is never a symbol of power," she had whispered. "It is a promise that wherever darkness grows, kindness must arrive first." Elena slowly opened her eyes again. This memory did not vanish. It remained, warm and steady inside her heart. Above them, footsteps echoed through the castle as Kale entered the archive carrying fresh reports from neighboring territories. Villages once divided by old disputes had begun helping one another without explanation. Hunters spoke of wild wolves guiding lost children safely home instead of fleeing into the wilderness. Streams that had remained dry throughout winter flowed again with clear water. Every report described quiet restoration rather than extraordinary miracles. Kale placed the letters upon the table before looking toward Elena with growing certainty. "Every change began after you arrived." Elena shook her head gently. "I did not do this." Dr. Miriam smiled. "Perhaps not intentionally. Sometimes hope spreads simply because someone carries it." Those words settled deeply into Kale's thoughts. He realized the castle itself had changed since Elena entered its gates. Servants smiled more often. Soldiers greeted one another with warmth instead of rigid formality. Even long-standing disagreements inside the royal council had softened into respectful conversation. Nothing dramatic had happened, yet everything felt lighter. Outside the archive windows, Lord Cedric quietly crossed the courtyard while hiding his concern behind practiced composure. He knew the kingdom was changing in ways that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Every peaceful sign confirmed what the oldest forbidden records had warned. If Elena fully embraced her forgotten calling, the carefully protected secrets of the past would eventually come into the light. That evening, Kale invited Elena to walk with him along the forest trail where they had first discovered the returning signs of spring. Fresh blossoms covered the path, and gentle sunlight filtered through towering pines that no longer felt cold or lonely. They stopped beside the same narrow stream where she had once helped the injured wolf pup. As though recognizing her return, several woodland animals quietly emerged from the trees without fear, drinking peacefully from the clear water before disappearing once more into the forest. Elena watched them with quiet wonder. "I feel as though this place has been waiting for me," she whispered. Kale looked at her, his expression calm and sincere. "Perhaps it has." She turned toward him, searching his eyes. Does it ever frighten you that I still do not know everything about my past? Kale answered without hesitation. No, because the woman standing beside me today has already shown me exactly who she is. His words filled the silence between them with unexpected warmth. Elena smiled, and for the first time since waking inside Ashen Keep, the uncertainty that had followed her for so long no longer felt heavier than hope. At that exact moment, the crescent pendant resting against her heart shone brighter than ever before, and somewhere deep within Blackwood Forest, an ancient circle of standing stones quietly awakened beneath the evening sky, as though answering a call that had been waiting for generations. The following morning dawned beneath a sky painted in soft shades of gold and blue as the people of Ashen Keep gathered within the ancient courtyard. News of the mysterious changes spreading across the kingdom had reached every village, and for the first time in many years the celebration was not for victory in battle or the signing of another treaty. It was a celebration of peace quietly returning to the land. Wolves from neighboring packs stood beside merchants, farmers, craftsmen, and children, their conversations filled with hope instead of suspicion. Elena walked through the open gates wearing a simple silver gown that reflected the morning light, without the weight of jewels or royal symbols. Around her neck rested the crescent pendant that had finally become more than a forgotten keepsake. It had become a reminder of the promise her mother had entrusted to her long ago. As she stepped into the center of the courtyard, the gentle breeze carried the fragrance of spring blossoms through the gathering, and every wolf present instinctively lifted their heads toward the sky before settling into complete silence. Dr. Miriam smiled quietly, recognizing what the oldest legends had always described. Harmony had returned not through force, but through compassion freely given. Kale walked toward Elena with calm confidence, his silver eyes never leaving hers. The royal mark upon his wrist shimmered softly beneath the morning sun, not with overwhelming brilliance, but with the quiet certainty of a promise fulfilled. He stopped only a few feet away before speaking clearly enough for everyone gathered to hear. When I found you beneath the snow, I believed I was saving a stranger. I know now that you were the one who saved this kingdom, and you did it without seeking power, praise, or recognition. You reminded all of us that kindness is never weakness. Elena felt emotion rise within her heart as forgotten memories settled peacefully into place. She finally remembered the ancient circle of standing stones, her mother's warm embrace, the songs shared beneath moonlit skies, and the teachings carried by every moon guardian before her. They had never been chosen to rule kingdoms. They had been chosen to protect hope wherever fear threatened to grow. She looked around the courtyard and saw smiles replacing old doubts, neighbors greeting one another as friends, and children laughing freely together. In that moment, she understood that her journey had never been about recovering the past alone. It had always been about building a better future. Kale slowly lowered himself onto one knee before her, not because tradition demanded it, but because respect came naturally from the heart. A gentle murmur spread through the gathered crowd before complete silence returned once again. Elena Brooks, he said warmly, before destiny revealed your name, before the ancient stories returned, before anyone spoke of sacred bonds, I had already chosen you. I chose you the night I refused to leave you alone beneath the winter sky. If you will allow it, I would like to spend every season beside you, protecting the peace we found together. Tears shimmered in Elena's eyes as she reached forward and gently lifted him back to his feet. And I choose you, she answered with a peaceful smile. Not because destiny asked me to, but because you showed me that love begins with kindness. As their hands met, the pendant and the royal mark glowed together one final time before settling into a quiet silver light that remained steady instead of fading. Around them, the wolves lifted their voices in a joyful chorus that echoed across the valley, not as a call to conflict, but as a welcome to a new beginning. High above the castle, the clouds slowly parted, allowing warm sunlight to wash across Ashen Keep, the surrounding forests, and the ancient standing stones hidden deep within Blackwood. The old traveler watched from a distant hillside with a contented smile before quietly continuing his journey, knowing the forgotten story of the Moon Guardians no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to every generation willing to believe that true strength is gentle and that love has the power to restore what fear can never keep forever. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with someone who believes kindness can change the world. Tell us in the comments, what was your favorite moment in Elena and Kale's journey? And do you believe destiny begins with fate, or with the simple choice to help someone when they need it most?